Hey everyone, welcome to the Fantasy Football in the Six podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Bandu, and with me is my main man, Johnny Shermer, and we're going to talk some fantasy football for this upcoming week. And looking at some of the games that we were talking about last week and some of the guys that we had from what we said of who to start and who to sit. We're going to also recap some of the injuries that happened over the weekend and some new starters and some players to sit for these games coming up. Johnny, how was your weekend watching some of these games?
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. Definitely quite a few surprising games that happened with the Bills, Seahawks, Saints, Bucks. There are definitely a few good ones for sure. But let's take a look at who I said to start here. So I'll start with the quarterbacks. Drew Lock against the Falcons. That was a great start. You didn't really need to listen to me for that. It was kind of a given with Atlanta's defense this season not being great. Drew Lock did put up over 30 fantasy points, which is his best game of the year so far. Judy did really well for him. He had 7 receptions for 125 yards, plus a touchdown, his second touchdown of the season. KJ Hamler also did really well. 6 receptions, 75 yards. But Drew Lock, I believe, also had a rushing touchdown too. So that's very good. Next, looking at last night's game against the Jets, Cam Newton. He did okay. I think he could have done a little better. But the Jets gave the Patriots a run for their money, so I was very surprised. But he put up 24.5 fantasy points, 2 rushing touchdowns. Jacoby Myers looked really good for him as well, getting targeted 14 times for 169 yards.
Yeah, that Drew Lock start really helped out my other team there in the league, putting up the 30 points, which was pretty nice. Although we still took the loss, it's a good option to have for starting if I need my quarterback to sit on the bench like this week with Joe Burrow on a bye. It's a good thing
Yep.
I got Drew Lock to start again. And yeah, Cam, that was a pretty surprising game. Watching the Jets kind of taking the lead and stuff, but it was nice to see Cam have a good game and bounce back from some of his poor performances. And now looking at like some of the players that I said to bench for the quarterbacks, my first one, Philip Rivers. Thank goodness, that we were saying to bench him because he only put up 5.07 fantasy points. He had that embarrassing attempt at his tackle there where he fell on the ground and, he just sat back up and looked like he was just a spoiled brat, just not getting his way. Offensively, they really struggled. He had 25 completions. He had 43 attempts, which is probably not good for a guy of his age. He only threw for 227 yards and one INT, and that was the pick six. So yeah, Philip Rivers was a good bench to have, there rather than starting. And my other bench player was Aaron Rodgers, and of course that the news had to come out with the COVID-19 for the 49ers. All came out on the Monday after we had recorded. So I was a little disappointed with that prediction afterwards. And, it was kind of a, big game for Aaron Rodgers. He was 25 of 31, 305 passing yards, 4 TDs. He had one rush for 7 yards. It was a very good game for Devontae Adams as well. Very horrible timing with the COVID-19 news. And I'm sorry if you guys happen to bench Aaron Rodgers for last week.
Yeah, that was certainly not a good choice, but looking back at it, the San Fran 49ers, they typically do have a good defense, so it's definitely hard to say, but exactly with that COVID-19 news right after we recorded, that definitely didn't help your cause.
Yeah, no, it definitely did not at all. So who are some of the wide receivers that you said from last week? How did they do for last week's games?
My receivers, they were okay. I'm going to start with the better one this week, Marvin Jones on the Detroit Lions. Obviously, being the number one receiver there in Detroit for this week against Minnesota with Kenny being out with a hip injury. He did okay. He had 4 receptions for 43 yards. He did get a touchdown, so that led to 13.3 fantasy points. He actually had less targets than Adrian Peterson did. So that's kind of concerning, but whatever. He got that touchdown, so it brought his fantasy points up. The second one that I did choose was Russell Gage on those Atlanta Falcons. That didn't really work out. I thought he was going to be a good number 2 right behind Julio Jones with Calvin Ridley out for this week. That was not the case. So Olamide Zaccheaus, he did really well. He had 103 yards, 1 touchdown. So he was definitely the go-to for Matt Ryan besides Julio last week.
Yeah, he was a big surprise for me. Like I was kind of looking at Russell Gage's numbers, and I was kind of like, where the hell are all these other targets going to? And I saw Olamide Zaccheaus kind of just popping off, and with the 103 yards, 1 TD, I'm kind of like, whoa, he's probably the number 2 behind Julio there.
Yeah, it definitely looked like that. Who are your sit options for wide receivers?
So I was kind of disappointed, with my sit options for the wide receiver position. Like I saw CeeDee Lamb versus Pittsburgh, looking at that matchup and seeing that they were starting their like 4th string quarterback, the quarterback from the AAF, Garrett Gilbert. I think that's what his name was. From the
Yep.
AAF. Yeah, he was I was kind of surprised. I'm like, you know what? Maybe this will be, probably the best idea to sit any of those Dallas wide receivers, but they actually did pretty well against Pittsburgh. They were leading for majority of the game, and then Pittsburgh ended up coming back. CeeDee Lamb had 4 receptions, 71 yards, a TD. He also had a fumble as well, but with the TD, it kind of saved his production and him having 16.60 fantasy points. Was kind of a surprise for me to see him do that well with the 4th string quarterback. And then my other option to bench was Devontae Parker versus Arizona. He kind of had a decent game, with 12.40 fantasy points, 6 receptions for 64 yards. He had the most targets on the team, so probably going forward, he's definitely the number 1 option there for Tua, and definitely going to be very consistent. Him, Mike Gesicki, and with Preston Williams now injured, those two just probably go way up more in value. So there's always that as well. And moving on now to the running backs. How were your guys with the stardom?
They were okay. I'll give myself a 50% success rate there. I'll start with the good one. Jerick McKinnon, he did really well against Green Bay. He had 12 rushes for 52 yards. He had a couple of receptions as well for 16 yards. But he did have that rushing touchdown, which really helped him perform. He was the lead back in this game. Wasn't a great performance by any means with 15.8 points, but he definitely did get the job done with Raheem Mostert out with injury. Secondly, I'll go to David Montgomery. I thought he was going to be, he was going to be decent against the Titans. That was not the case. He did play most of the game actually, and I believe he got rocked pretty hard in the 4th quarter, so he had to leave the game because of concussion protocol. But up until then, he only had 30 yards with 14 rushes. He had a couple of receptions for 12 yards. He also had a fumble. So it's definitely not looking bright for Montgomery. I like to think he's going to do well every single week just because we mentioned last week his production on the team is wild. Like he gets most of the snaps. He gets most of the playing time with that running back position, but he continues to disappoint.
Yeah, it was definitely surprising to see all those opportunities and nothing really come out of it for David Montgomery. He's definitely like the backup there in Chicago is definitely going to be an option to probably pick up and stream for people that need a running back. Jerick McKinnon, yeah, pretty good game and everything. 15.8 fantasy points, that's pretty good. But with Dalvin Cook kind of running all over the Green Bay defense, you'd kind of want maybe Jerick McKinnon to push for that 20 points or something, really push your
Yeah,
team over the top.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and some of the guys that I was saying to sit, we'll start off with my, yikes that I kind of had. James Robinson, very surprised with how the team was able to perform with their 2nd string quarterback there. Very surprised by the rookie's performance. James Robinson had 25 rushes for 99 yards, 1 TD. He was targeted 2 times, but he didn't catch any of those targets. He had 15.9 fantasy points. Pretty good for some fantasy owners there. And the other running back I had was Jonathan Taylor versus the Ravens. He did not do as well. He had 9.9 fantasy points, 6 rushes for 27 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 receptions for 7 yards, and 1 fumble. Things aren't looking pretty good for Jonathan Taylor as of late. Pretty inconsistent games, and maybe he's still dealing with that ankle injury. We'll have to keep a look at his snap count between Jordan Wilkins and Naheem Hines, and hopefully he could bounce back later on in the year for the playoffs. And we'll start to take a look now at some of the tight ends you may have mentioned to start for this week, for last week.
Yeah, so I had an okay week guessing who to start for this week. First up was Logan Thomas versus the Giants. He did okay. I think they played the Giants a couple of weeks ago, and he did a lot better than he did this week.
Hmm.
He had 6.8 points this week, 3 receptions, 28 yards. So not great, not bad, but it definitely could have been better considering, like I said, he did do a lot better against the Giants a couple of weeks ago when they played. Secondly, I said start Noah Fant against those Falcons. Same thing. I believe he did suffer an ankle injury in the first quarter. He did play through it, but obviously it slowed him down quite a bit. You could tell. So Drew Lock was forced to throw more so to Jerry Jeudy or Tim Patrick. But he did have 3 targets. He caught all of them for 45 yards. So he would have had a great game if he didn't suffer that injury. But what can you do? It doesn't look too serious. So he should be back for this week. But yeah, it was okay. It could have been better though.
Yeah, I'm glad Logan Thompson didn't have a big game against the Giants. That was kind of close for my team there. And we pulled out the win against them again. So we kind of swept them for this year, which I'm pretty happy about. Puts us 2 wins on the board. I don't know if we'll get more this year, but if we were to play Washington another 6 more times, we definitely have a playoff spot.
For
Yeah,
sure.
very disappointed with the injury to Noah Fant, but hopefully he's able to bounce back and come back for next week. And the tight ends that I said to sit, Jonu Smith versus Chicago was kind of a okay game for him. He had 2 receptions for 32 yards and 1 touchdown. What can you do? Like once the touchdown comes in, that's a good 6 points right there. Put him at 11.20 points there for any of your tight end spots if you had started him. And then Hunter Henry versus the Las Vegas Raiders. 7 targets, 4 receptions for 33 yards. He had 7.3 points. And, with this game is kind of surprising seeing at the end with, Herbert throwing to that other tight end that they have. I forget his name. Blanking on it right now for the end of the game instead of like Keenan Allen or even like Hunter Henry as an option. Very surprising for that to happen. But moving forward, I don't think that kind of affects Hunter Henry's value. He's still kind of a good option to have if you do not have a tight end. So he's still, pretty good to play. But it was just for last week. It was kind of a good option to sit. And if you had started someone else, hopefully that they helped you out for your team.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on to the injuries that occurred this week. So the big one, obviously, Christian McCaffrey coming back against those Kansas City Chiefs. He had a great game. I think he put up over 32 fantasy points or something like that. So he had a really good game. But he did suffer a shoulder injury right at the end, and it's not looking too serious. But he could be missing this week.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised by the injury coming up, after the game and everything. It was kind of happened in the fourth quarter, I think, on their last drive where he just got hit out of bounds and then he kind of got up and his shoulder was kind of bugging him. Just, huge loss if he is done for the rest of the year, if they do decide to take him out, just to keep him, healthy for next year. And Mike Davis owners are kind of pretty happy if they did not drop him. And if he's available, you could definitely pick him up. The next injury that kind of caught me by surprise was Big Ben. He tested positive for COVID, so that's not good news. But hopefully, like if it comes back as a false positive, then he'd be good to go for next week. But he also injured both of his knees in the game. It doesn't sound like it's anything too serious. So if he does come back with like a false positive COVID test, then he's probably good to start. The Steelers overall, some players had tested positive for COVID. I know Vance McDonald was one of the players on the list there, and I don't know if any players in close contact with him are also going to be put on the COVID reserve list. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. Yeah, and who is the next injury that you had there on the list?
Next injury comes from Miami wide receiver Preston Williams. He did have a pretty bad foot injury. He was carted off the field. X-rays did come back negative, but whenever a player's carted off, it doesn't look too good. So he might be out 2 to 3 weeks, possibly even longer than that.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to keep an eye on that. And with that injury, it kind of boosts, the value of Devontae Parker a lot
Yep,
more.
for
And
sure.
this injury was very bad, very similar to Dak Prescott's injury, and it sucks that it happened against the Giants again. Kyle Allen dislocated ankle; he's done for the year. Alex Smith is the next quarterback in line to start. Uh, you know, with Kyle Allen out and Alex Smith starting to play again, it's a pretty good option all around for some fantasy owners. If you do have any Washington players on your team, very good option to have. And David Montgomery, we did discuss about David Montgomery's concussion earlier. Probably look to pick up the backup running back there, like we said, for the good opportunities that could come out of it. And the next guy, who do you have there?
Coming from Jacksonville, Laviska Shenault, he did have a hamstring injury. Again, it didn't look too serious, so he might be starting in Week 10. If not, DJ Chark's obviously going to be that number one receiver again, like he was this past week. Keenan Cole might be getting some more targets, but yeah, we'll just have to wait and see if Laviska can get in some practices during the week.
Yeah, DJ Chark blew up last week, against Houston with Laviska Shenault out for the game. And then David Johnson from the Houston Texans, he had a concussion injury. Definitely something to evaluate with the concussion protocol. And if he's unable to go, Duke Johnson is the next back to step up and into that starting position. He's a pretty good option. He's a good receiving back in a PPR league. He'll get you a lot of touches and opportunities. And the next guy on our list is
Next up, Noah Fant. We did mention him earlier, obviously, with that ankle injury. Again, it doesn't look too serious, so he should be back for Week 10 just because he did play through it. Like again, obviously, if he played through it, it shouldn't be too bad. So he does have a good shot at coming back for Week 10. Last on our injury list for this week, Justin Jackson. I'm very sorry if you did start him because I literally think he got injured on the first play of the game.
Yeah, that was pretty unfortunate to see Justin Jackson getting injured there right away. And then seeing Blaj come into the game, he was pretty good option. And then Joshua Kelly as well. Um, both of them are good running backs, but it's kind of expected to see Austin Eckler bounce back and coming back into the starting lineup soon. And players, that are coming back from injury, we're pretty excited about. Miles Sanders, very good option. Who's another guy you got there, Johnny?
Very excited for this next one, Nick Chubb. I have him on out of the three teams in my fantasy league, so I'm very excited for him to come back. Seeing him go down in Week 4 against the Cowboys was definitely a shocker. It definitely could have been avoided, but whatever. What can you do with injuries? I'm glad to see him most likely come back, and if he does get a practice in this week, it'll definitely be 100% against the Houston Texans for Sunday.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting to have him back. And then with the Browns, I know they were kind of leading the league in rushing. Um, so with him coming back, I'm sure they'll go back to that game plan and everything. So it's kind of good for fantasy owners that have him. And then Joe Mixon, him coming back into the starting lineup, really good for Joe Burrow. I noticed that Giovanni Bernard, he was kind of popping off here and there in between some games and doing pretty well. And it's kind of nice to see that because now you picture Joe Mixon kind of doing those things once he comes back from injury. And he'll be able to help your team probably out in the playoffs if you have him. And then the next guy is kind of a big deal in Seattle.
Yes, sir. Chris Carson. I'm glad to see him back as well. He's definitely one of the key parts in that Seahawks offense. I think it definitely did hurt them a little bit to not have him against the Bills. So that could have been a difference maker for sure instead of DJ Dallas back there. But again, what can you do? Chris Carson is one tough guy. So he's definitely going to try to come back this week for sure.
Yeah, it's exciting to see that all these guys coming back are all running backs and definitely a depleted position. And some of these teams that play in the running back committee, it's good to see these guys coming back. They take charge in their starting roles and then they assert their dominance against the defenses. So we'll start going into our Week 10 starters and our Week 10 sits as well. The first guy I got on my Week 10 starters is Carson Wentz versus New York Giants. This is kind of obvious to start him against the Giants because the last time they played, Carson Wentz put up 27.37 fantasy points. And, even though it's against my Giants, I would definitely start Carson Wentz in my lineup if I had him. And even though, like with Miles Sanders, we did talk about him coming back into the game as well. Him coming back may take away from Carson Wentz's overall fantasy production, but I'm still looking for Carson Wentz to be a reliable starter and to put up some pretty good points this week against my team.
Yeah, it's definitely a good start for sure. I think, like you said, he did do well against those Giants a couple weeks ago. So obviously, it's a no-brainer to start him again. Moving on to my QB sits for this week. First of all, I'm going to have to say Cam Newton. Although he did have a decent game against the Jets, he did get rocked pretty hard. I'm not too sure if you saw that, Anthony, last night, but it did come out today that he is dealing with a sore neck. So even if he does play, it's against Baltimore. Baltimore is probably the top 2 defense in the league. They really don't have anyone else to throw to besides Jacoby Myers. Yeah, Baltimore really doesn't allow too many passing yards, not too many rushing yards. So it would definitely be a tough game for Cam. Moving to my second, actually on the other side of the field, Lamar Jackson. I know you don't like to hear that, Anthony, since you do have him,
Yeah,
but
that's not good.
he's been struggling this year. It's definitely not a secret anymore. He did have a great week 1, but after that, he really hasn't done much. He definitely does not look like the Lamar that we saw last year in his MVP season. Although the Patriots are struggling a little bit on defense, like we obviously saw last night against the Jets, they are allowing around 222 passing yards a game, 131 rushing yards. But again, if Ingram is out against those Patriots, I think the Ravens are definitely going to look again towards using Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins for that rush game. Jackson's obviously going to have some rushing yards himself. But again, I think they're going to more so use Edwards and Dobbins for this week.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to pick up a new quarterback if that's the case with Lamar Jackson and going against New England. Thank you for that. I will definitely take that into consideration and definitely find someone on the waivers to pick up. Uh,
For sure.
some someone else to start for your quarterbacks there is Jared Goff against Seattle. Now with Jared Goff, his last game was against the Miami Dolphins, and of course it was kind of a terrible outing for him. Throwing those multiple interceptions, I think he only had like 7 fantasy points for that week. But at least he was able to go into his bye week, kind of prepare for Seattle. It's a team that he's played multiple times before in the past. So with Jared Goff going against the worst pass defense in the league right now, and seeing Josh Allen kind of rip them apart for 400 yards and like 4 TDs, I'm kind of expecting Jared Goff to bounce back, have a good week against them, and kind of have more overall production than what he's used to, just because of how badly Seattle's defensive secondary is. Jared Goff, he if you look at the numbers for between his 8 games that he's played against Seattle, he does have 8 TDs and 8 interceptions, but this Seattle defense is definitely not the same as it used to be. So Jared Goff will definitely have a pretty good week against this team.
Yeah, exactly. Coming off of that game with Josh Allen, obviously, like you said, he looked really good. He hasn't looked too good within the past 5-6 weeks, but when you do go up against that Seahawks defense, who aren't doing so hot this year, it's definitely a good idea to start whatever QB is going against them.
Yeah, and then we'll now take a look at some of the running backs you suggest to sit for this week.
Yeah, so I'll start off, like I just mentioned, with the Buffalo Bills, Devin Singletary. I had really high hopes for him this season. Like in our league, I kept him as a keeper, and obviously that's not looking too good for me. He finished the season last season very strongly, but this season it's not looking too great for him. I know they're using Zach Moss a lot more in that in the red zone area, so that's definitely taking away from Singletary's production fantasy wise for those points with the touchdowns. But yeah, it's not looking too great. Arizona, they don't have great defense. 126 rushing yards on average makes them top 10 worst in the league. But again, I think Zach Moss is going to get those important touches that we as fantasy owners need.
Yeah, like it's kind of a surprise that Zach Moss, he was banged up for a bit. He missed some games, and Devin Singletary, I don't think like he really capitalized on the opportunity while Zach Moss was out, and now it's kind of coming back to haunt him, where Zach Moss is taking those touches away, where you kind of want him to put up those points in the end zone there. One of the running backs I said to start, he was kind of a surprise from last week is Mr. J.D. McKissick. Johnny, I believe you said earlier, off the pod that he was, one of your guys you last second kind of started there in your lineup, which kind of paid off for you pretty well. And with Alex Smith now becoming the starting quarterback for the Washington football team, it's kind of good because Alex Smith is a quarterback game manager. So he could definitely check it down to McKissick a bunch of times like he did in the last game. Even though McKissick only had 3 carries for 17 yards, he did put up 19.20 fantasy points, and that was definitely through the air where he was targeted 14 times and he had 9 receptions for 65 yards. Definitely in a PPR league, it's looking pretty good for J.D. McKissick. And going against the Lions, they've given up the 4th most rushing yards in the league with 1,185 yards, and they've given up 13 TDs on the ground. So definitely I could see McKissick having a pretty good game overall, balance on the ground and through the air as well. So definitely he's a good start against the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, I was definitely happy I switched him out with Jordan Howard right before that 1 p.m. deadline. So that definitely worked out for me. But yeah, seeing a running back get 14 targets like JD McKissick, that's pretty wild. And like you said, for PPR leagues, that's really, really good. So going up against those Lions, like you said, I think it's definitely going to be a good matchup for him. Moving on to my running back, second running back sit. That's going to be a Jerick McKinnon. So I did say start him last week. I'm going to say sit him this week. I think they're going up against the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, the Saints, they got great defense. It's no secret there. They got great rush defense. They got great pass defense. So with Jerick McKinnon going up against that defense, I don't think he's going to do too much, especially with the 49ers and their injuries this year. They're just not helping him up front with that O-line. So I really do not think he's going to get too much done against the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. And even so from Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week, like they only had 5 rushes for the whole game, which is the least amount in NFL history. So I feel like they definitely like got the Bucks off of their game plan early, and I really don't hope the same for Jerick McKinnon and owners, to fall in that same level of low production. But if that's the case, it's kind of a good idea to sit him out this week. But if you do have this running back, you definitely want to start him. It's Melvin Gordon versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Melvin Gordon against the Raiders in his career has put up 548 rush yards, and he scored 5 TDs on the ground. He's also had 307 receiving yards and 3 TDs as well. And the Raiders currently have given up 13 rushing TDs all this year on the ground as well. So he's definitely a good option to start. And I know with Philip Lindsay being there, he definitely does not take away from Melvin Gordon's level of production at all. The last game Philip Lindsay played was against the Atlanta Falcons, and he only played for, I think, like 24% of offensive snaps that game, and Gordon kind of dominated uh, the snaps for the offense and the running back position. He played 6% of those snaps against the Atlanta Falcons, so he definitely capitalized a bit on his opportunities there. And I believe the Broncos do like him as the lead back, so definitely see him taking over that role and doing well against the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, for sure. Although he does split time with Lindsay, I think, like you said, they definitely do see him as the number one back there. They didn't sign him for no reason. So I think that's definitely a good start for that matchup against the Raiders. Moving on to my running back my wide receiver sits for this week. First up is going to be Devontae Parker against those Chargers. Although the Chargers aren't great on defense, I think with Preston Williams most likely out for this week, coverage on Parker is going to be a lot higher than it normally would be. Parker did have 6 receptions last week against a Cardinals defense, but I know Tua wants to experiment a lot more with different plays and everything, so I think we're just definitely going to see Parker's value for this week go down a little bit. But you never know. It's definitely a riskier sit, but I think it could pay off.
Yeah, it would be it's kind of a half and half split decision. Definitely with between wanting to start him or sit him, it could go either way, for sure. So one of the wide receivers I was saying to, start for this week, even though he kind of had a dud week last week, was Corey Davis. Corey Davis, he was targeted 3 times and he had 0 points against the Chicago Bears. He's a pretty good option. Usually in the offense when he is playing. Against the Pittsburgh Steelers and Cincinnati, he put up 15.50 points against the Steelers, and he had 26.80 points against the Bengals. I'm pretty confident in his ability as a number 2 wide receiver on the field beside AJ Brown. I think with the Colts, they'll probably focus so much attention on AJ Brown that it'll just open up more opportunities for Corey Davis on the field, and that's where he'll have that production that you kind of been hoping for that you didn't get from him last week. So he's definitely a start on a short week. I think they play this Thursday night, so it'll be a good game for Corey Davis against the Colts.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I think before that game on Sunday, some poor schmuck asked me on Twitter, who should I start? Should I start Corey Davis or should I start DJ Chark? And I said, oh, Corey Davis, without a question. DJ Chark doesn't have Minshew in the lineup. He's not going to do anything. Corey Davis has been doing a lot lately. It's definitely the better pick, and he puts up a big goose egg. So I hope that guy did not listen to me. But yeah, let's move on from that. My second wide receiver sit for this week is going to be Adam Thielen on those Minnesota Vikings. But yeah, like you said, with that matchup with Corey Davis against the Chicago Bears, he put up nothing. And Chicago obviously does have one of the best defenses in the league. So I think with Adam Thielen, especially struggling as of late, only putting up 10.5 fantasy points since their week 7 bye. So that's 2 weeks only putting up 10 points. That's not looking good, especially when you go up against the Bears defense. For any Vikings receiver, whether that's Jefferson or Thielen, that's not going to be good. So I think you should definitely stay away from starting either of those two. But for this specific story, I'm going to say sit Adam Thielen for sure.
Well, I got Justin Jefferson in my starting lineup. Hopefully my waivers go through and I'm able to pick up a wide receiver, so that way I could bench him. The
Yep.
other wide receiver I have to start this week is Mike Evans versus the Carolina Panthers. He had a decent game against the New Orleans Saints. He had like 10.6 fantasy points. And the offense didn't do really well overall as a team. They only scored like 3 points for that game. But I'm gonna put my money on Tom Brady kind of being angry and feeling like his back's against the wall, and everybody's doubting him and this offense, and he's just going to come out angry and start throwing the ball to everybody and give the ball to his playmakers, because that's what Tom does best after he's been kind of shitted on. So I'm kind of betting on Mike Evans to do really well, and I haven't seen that chemistry really build up between AB and Tom. I know Tom targeted him a few times there during that game, but definitely the chemistry is off, and I know he has some pretty good chemistry with Mike Evans. So Mike Evans against Carolina Panthers is a good start for me.
Yeah, you hit it right on the money there. I think Tom Brady, he's definitely going to bounce back for sure. I think whenever the Bucks get embarrassed like that in a primetime game, they're not going to come out next week looking like the same team. They're definitely going to switch things up. Who knows if Brady's going to hit Brown a little more, but I know Bruce Arians after the game was pretty concerned that Brady didn't throw to Evans a lot more. He was open apparently a lot more than what Brady had let on. But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. But I think Mike Evans is definitely a great start for this matchup. All right, let's move on to my sits for tight ends. First off, we're going to start with one of my favorite Saints, Jared Cook. Although San Fran is struggling as of late, their coverage on tight ends is one of the best in the league. I think they rank fourth best or something with that type of coverage. But Cook, has looked very good within the past couple of games, but they mostly use him in the red zone. So I wouldn't expect him to get many points this week with that tough 49ers defense, especially with all of our receivers back and healthy with Thomas, Sanders, Callaway, etc. So I think Cook is definitely going to have a lower scoring game this week.
Yeah, it's going to be very tough for Jared Cook to, have that big production that he had when Michael Thomas was out, and then, Emmanuel Sanders and Callaway all back. Just a very tough option to have him being your starting tight end. So hopefully you're able to find someone that you could stream. Who's the other tight end that you have there to sit this week?
Same situation with you. I think Mike Evans is going to look really good. So that's why I'm going to say sit Rob Gronkowski. I think these receivers are going to be meaner than ever this upcoming week with Godwin, Evans, and Brown coming in. I think Gronk might slowly slip away for the rest of the season. You never know, but he did have a couple of drop passes. He didn't look great, although the whole Bucks team didn't look great. Brady obviously wasn't himself, so that definitely throws Gronkowski off of his game. But again, I think he might slip away for the rest of the season with those three healthy receivers back and ready to go.
Yeah, like I could just kind of picture Gronk being more like now so a red zone target than he is kind of the move the sticks kind of guy. Um, and sometimes it's good that he'll get the touchdowns, but you kind of want the bit of the catches in between to move the sticks to help boost his fantasy points there, because the touchdowns are pretty good, but when it's like if you just see him catch one touchdown and have one reception for like 5 yards, it's not going to do a whole lot for your team.
Yeah, exactly. You definitely want more of those, like you said, passes up the middle instead of just those touchdowns. But I'm not going to complain if he gets the touchdown. But let's move on to your tight end starts of the week.
Yeah, so big one. This tight end we've been talking about a lot for this podcast episode. Noah Fant versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Even though he only had 3 receptions, 45 yards, and he was taken out of the game for a little brief moment there at the beginning in the first quarter, injuring his ankle. Alberto is done for the year with a torn ACL, so Noah Fant should just be thrusted into the starting lineup in your fantasy league, because he's just going to be trusted by Drew Lock and getting him the ball. The Raiders have also given up. They ranked in the top 10 actually in allowing catches and yards to tight ends. So he's kind of a really good option to start since Drew Lock has been hot the past few games. So definitely a good option there against the Las Vegas Raiders. And the other tight end I have is Ross Dwelley versus the New Orleans Saints. This just becomes a reliable option just because of the injuries on the 49ers roster. With Kittle kind of out for the year, and Jordan Reed is barely, getting the snap counts on the field and everything. Dwelley has just more opportunities. So Dwelley played 74% of offensive snaps last week against the Green Bay Packers, and Jordan Reed only played 13 snaps the last game. So Jordan Reed, I know he was coming off of an injury and everything and just coming back in. They might work him in a little slowly, so it kind of gives you time with Dwelley to start up in your lineup. But I think he'll be a pretty decent option to have against the New Orleans Saints. Hopefully catch a few balls and stuff with some of the receivers that may be missing some time. So yeah, Ross Dwelley is definitely an option.
Yeah, I hope you're wrong with that because I don't really want my Saints to lose against that struggling 49ers team. But who knows what's going to happen? They tend to show up at the wrong time. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see from there. And then what's the defense you have there for your bench?
Yeah, so something new we're going to do this week starts and sits for defense. For my sits, I'm going to say Tampa Bay. Obviously, for the 100th time we've mentioned in this podcast, did not look good against the Saints. So I'm going to say Carolina, they've been hot lately with that offense. It really depends on whether McCaffrey is going to play or not. It's not sounding like he will, but even if he doesn't, Mike Davis is still there. He's been playing this season well enough to know what to do there. So again, with Davis in there, with Anderson healthy, with DJ Moore still in there, with Curtis Samuel going off lately, actually too, they might be surprisingly a good team, and it might be bad for that Tampa Bay defense.
Yeah, that Tampa Bay defense, they blitz a lot. Um, they're one of the heaviest blitzing teams in the league. I noticed too, even against the Giants, like Daniel Jones had a few long balls there where his receivers were just wide open and he just couldn't connect. So Tampa Bay is definitely streaky defense. They'll be good one week and then they could be very bad the next. So it's kind of hard to tell. Against the Carolina Panthers, yeah, definitely a good idea to sit. One of the defenses I was suggesting to start is the Minnesota Vikings versus the Chicago Bears. The Vikings defense has kind of been on a roll the past few weeks, and it's mainly because of Dalvin Cook and his ability running the ball. He chews up clock, he makes those big plays, and he kind of puts a big lead out for the Vikings, and it kind of makes the opposing teams one dimensional to play catch up. Uh, you know, Going against the Chicago Bears, Nick Foles isn't really the greatest quarterback out there right now. Last week against the Lions, the Minnesota Vikings put up 9.95 fantasy points and they had 3 interceptions. Nick Foles is currently ranked sixth in the league with 7 interceptions so far. So it's definitely a good idea to start the Vikings against the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, exactly. I 100% agree. I always think to myself when I watch these Bears every Sunday, how good would this team be if they actually had a solid offense? I mean, their QB situation is down in the dumps. Nick Foles isn't good. Mitch Trubisky's trash. Allen Robinson, I mean, is okay, but then when you go look at the rushing game, like we've mentioned a bit, David Montgomery, he's not consistent at all. So I think putting those Vikings against that Chicago offense is definitely going to pay off.
Yeah, I think so too, most definitely. So they're definitely a good option to start for their defense. Um, and that kind of wraps up everything that we had to talk about for this week. It was pretty good, I think, so far from what we had with our like starts and what happened. Listing some of the players that came back from injuries, some of the injuries that occurred, our starts and sits. We really appreciate you guys for listening. Thank you so much. Definitely give us a follow on our Twitter and Instagram page. That's FF in the Six. Give us a download on Spotify. We're happy to have you guys listen in and check out our YouTube channel as well. Thank you so much and take care.